recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you. I'm really appreciate the opportunity to raise some questions related to the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, very near and dear to my heart. And I'd have to say, Madam Chair, this is the most important ministry in government. It has the most important role in government right now, leading us through a period of reconciliation with nations across the province. And in that work, there can never be enough attention paid to taking the time to get it right and working tirelessly to make amends for over 150 years of history that we need to move beyond. My questions tonight are intended to sort of explore the vision for the ministry and the minister's vision for the next 4 years. We have a real opportunity here to make some major progress, and so with that in mind, I'll raise some questions. So the first question arises from the fact that Indigenous governments in this province continue to face significant barriers in delivering key services and supports in their communities. And this largely stems from the lack of adequate and diverse revenue streams to Indigenous communities in comparison to other local governments in the province. So my question, through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister is, can the Minister speak to their plan to ensure Indigenous governments receive stable, reliable, and diverse streams of revenues sufficient to support their governing capacity beyond just this fiscal year? Thanks.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to start by saying I see that some folks have left the room, but I wanted to thank the members of the official opposition for respectful questions and discussion on what I agree is a very important topic for us all. And we'll welcome and move on to questions. The question just asked. So, as part of implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, as the member knows, we're working toward a future where Indigenous governments can fulfill their responsibilities, care for their people, and manage their territories in ways that reflect their values. This will involve co-developing new principled fiscal framework with Indigenous peoples based on the recognition of Indigenous rights. The fiscal and economic context has certainly changed since the co-development process began over 2 years ago, but First Nations have been clear that The projects that will help us diversify the economy need to be developed in partnership and include principled revenue sharing frameworks that support both Indigenous and provincial governments. And we remain committed to continuing this important work in a way that responds to the current pressures while meeting our commitments in the Declaration Act Action Plan.
Member.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a long history in this province that has evolved through numerous court cases in terms of consultation with First Nations on issues that relate to potential infringement of rights and title and accommodation. And in that respect, it's very important to ensure we don't produce a burden of consultation on Indigenous communities. And I know recently there's been consultation in my riding, as an example, in relation to dock management plans, and there's been consultation in relation to Islands Trust policies and statements. And the reality is still for many nations that they have a huge stack of referrals or consultation letters, and it can be overwhelming to provide a reasonable response in the time required. So the question I have is, can the minister speak to this government's plan to reduce the administrative and financial burden on Indigenous communities to ensure they have the proper resources to actually participate meaningfully in consultation?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question. The province has a responsibility to consult with First Nations when making decisions that may affect their rights, and how we satisfy this responsibility is generally through consultation. Decision-making agreements can also address these responsibilities where there's an approach that's agreed upon by the province and a First Nation. The province supports nations in consultation processes in a number of ways. This can include agreements such as strategic engagement agreements and consultation process agreements that provide funding to nations for participation that's structured consultation. Funding may also be provided for specific contexts or projects such as the EA process.
Member.
Madam Chair, in this province, we have started down the path of shared decision-making, and we can see it arising in a variety of contexts, both in terms of composition of local government decision-making bodies, for example, the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District. We can see it evolving in different ways tailored to the environment and the needs and wishes of nations and governments in particular parts of the province. And it's hard, it's a lot of hard work to build that shared decision making, and we really need to get it right. And one of the things that, and coming back to something I'm fairly familiar with in terms of my riding, there's over 20 nations within my riding, and there's also a variety of governance issues, and one of them is, I'll come back to it, dock management and the approval of docks and so on. And the work that's taking place on that is an example of an area where there could be shared decision making. But what we've seen through the events of last year at Pinter Harbor is that you can really run into some difficult relationship building issues. And so my question is I'm on the understanding the ministry's committed to pursuing shared decision-making opportunities consistent with DRIPA and other policy and legislation. But how will this ministry equip First Nations with the capacity and financial support to actually participate meaningfully in the development of those shared decision-making processes and the consultation that goes along with that, with those impacted, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, because it's an example, you can't get it wrong, so I'm curious about your assessment of how we properly provide the capacity for that.
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. I want to start by stating that, again, as the member knows through his extensive work in this area, I appreciate that building capacity takes time and often isn't a linear process. We enter into shared decision-making through agreements, and those agreements include capacity funding intended to enable First Nation to meaningfully participate in that shared decision-making process.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister. The Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act has been celebrated as an important framework for reconciliation, and certainly my understanding is it was passed unanimously. However, sometimes it doesn't feel that way, and certainly certain members have called for DRIPA, as it's come to be called, to be repealed. Can the Minister, through the Chair, speak to the status of the Declaration Act Secretariat and whether this government is continuing to support full implementation of DRIPA?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. So the Secretariat was established in Budget 2022. The mandate of the Secretariat is to help advance Section 3 of the Declaration Act. Its core functions are to provide guidance on consultation and cooperation and consistency of laws, to develop processes and measures to support the alignment of laws, to inform government's legislative agenda, and to serve in an interlocutor role. The Secretariat has been actively involved in supporting the province to pass priority legislation, and I'm happy to give a few examples of recent and relevant amendments, which include the Anti-Racism Act, the Children, Family and Community Services Amendment Act, the Emergency and Disaster Management Act, the School Amendment Act, the Health Professions and Occupations Act, and the Indigenous Self-Government in Children and Family Services Amendment Act. As I know, the member is aware, the Declaration Act remains in every mandate letter. This government is fully committed to advancing meaningful reconciliation through the implementation of the Declaration Act.
Member.
Madam Chair, through to the Minister, could the Minister clarify, and thank you for the answer, what amount of funding is in this year's budget in relation to implementation of DRIPA?
Minister.
Thanks, and thanks again for the question. So the Declaration Act Secretariat and members can find this on page 130 of our budget. The Declaration Act Secretariat's net budget is $4.5 million. The Reconciliation, Transformation and Strategies Division budget is $3.6 million. Those are just two of the focused pieces within my ministries working on implementing the Declaration Act, but the work of implementation of the Declaration Act is woven through every budget, every ministry, and all through government, so I can't give a more fulsome number than that except to point to the specific pieces within my own ministries.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. The at the heart of the work that we will collectively do over the next 3-4 years is building an approach to what some view as a contentious aspect of DRIPA, which is the application of free, prior, and informed consent. And this becomes particularly contentious at times when we're in more of a setting or a part of the province where there's extensive private land holdings, and it would be helpful to hear through you, Madam Chair, the Minister's vision and the government's approach to the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, and what's the vision for how that would be administered in various parts of the province.
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. So free, prior, and informed consent is about engaging with First Nations on proposed activities in their territories right from the beginning. The Declaration Act gives us more tools to get to an orderly, structured, and transparent process for working with Indigenous peoples towards decisions that affect and that benefit everyone. This can help us move away from conflict and drawn out court cases and uncertainty and move forward with collaboration and respect. Engaging First Nations early on creates opportunities for Indigenous peoples, industry, businesses, communities, and families everywhere. And it's this government's clear understanding that respectful partnerships foster predictability, good jobs, and opportunities while protecting the environment and respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples. We know that there are complexities in moving this work forward, and we're committed to addressing those complexities and doing that important and sometimes challenging work in partnership with First Nations. That's the work that we have together and a clear commitment to do it.
Member recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The the work that is underway to build frameworks of to deal with free, prior, and informed consent and to build shared decision-making have to be tailored and are tailored to the particular circumstances and parties involved. At the nub of it, we all want consensus, and it's just like here in the legislature. Wouldn't it be great if we all had consensus? And sometimes we do, and it's quite exciting. But then other times we don't. And in this House we have, protocols and approaches, policies, orders, votes that ultimately, and even division bills, that ultimately lead to a decision being taken. So my question through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister is, what is your government's approach when the parties involved can't reach consensus, where the nation and the resource company, or the nation and the local government, or the nation and the province can't reach consensus? And an additional complication, as we know, is that a particular decision may involve 4 or 5 nations that just like local governments don't always agree, so there's that complexity. So the question really is, what is your government's approach when the involved parties cannot come to a consensus?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair, and again, thanks for such a good question. The truth is, of course, that we don't always reach consensus, but our goal is to achieve free, prior, and informed consent on matters that impact First Nations rights and interests in BC. Where that can't be achieved, we rely on a variety of tools, mediation and dispute resolution and negotiation. The province's Section 7 agreements to date and those that will follow are a high watermark with respect to achieving free, prior, and informed consent. They build a strong and transparent process. They set out criteria. They provide an understanding of the decision-making process, and they provide opportunities for third parties to be effectively heard. As stated, if people agree they can challenge a decision, they're judicially reviewable. That's our approach to sound decision-making made together to make the province stronger, and we're committed to doing that work in partnership with First Nations.
Member.
Thank you, Minister. Madam Chair, and through the Minister, there's no questioning the commitment of the government and the Minister to use every tool in the toolkit to try and reach consensus. But at the end of the day, if consensus can't be reached, how do you go about deciding or establishing the ultimate decision?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. Again, a really good and meaty question, and it is a case-by-case basis. So the work that we do includes assessing the perspective of the First Nation whose rights may be impacted, assessing the discussions that we've had with them and the efforts that have been made to work together, assessing the legislative and regulatory context around the decision and our agreement and relationship context, and then subject to all of that context, including whether we have a shared decision-making framework in place, we would get to a decision. Again, I'm not trying to be evasive, except to reiterate that it really is a case-by-case basis, and all of those factors and relevant contexts come into the decision.
Member.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister, and thank you for the answer to the previous question. With your announcement of $36 million in new funding for Indigenous language revitalization and preservation in this budget, can the Minister describe the plans for this additional funding and how it will be directed?
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. Again, really glad to get this question, an exciting part of this budget. So to support First Nations languages, heritage, arts and cultures programming, BC announced $15 million per year in budget 2025 for the First Peoples Cultural Council. This includes $12 million per year dedicated to addressing the growing demand for language revitalization, and will provide critical jobs for speakers, particularly elders and First Nations women. Since 2018, BC has committed $136 million to support First Nations languages, arts, cultural heritage, and traditional knowledge. And The question gets into some of how we do that work, and so I wanted to highlight some of the targets from the First Peoples Cultural Council, which are also in the service plan. The first target is creating 3,300 new speakers through the Mentor Apprentice program. The second is documenting all languages in BC on firstvoices.com. It's a resource I really recommend checking out. The third target is training 1,400 people in arts, language, and heritage revitalization. The fourth is creating comprehensive language revitalization plans in partnership with nations for what that long-term work that they're leading themselves looks like. And the fifth is supporting skilled jobs in community, with a target is 4,500 skilled jobs in community through that permanent and ongoing funding.
Member.
Thank you, Minister. The election federally is over, and we now have, we know who the next Prime Minister is going to be, Prime Minister Carney, and we also know that the Prime Minister is demonstrate a real commitment to tackling both Trump and issues more generally, and so through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister, what steps are you and your government taking to engage with the federal government in relation to Indigenous issues and Indigenous funding now that we actually know what government we're dealing with?
My apologies.
That's okay.
Sorry, Minister.
Thank you, new chair. And again, thanks for the question. BC and Canada both have roles to advance reconciliation with First Nations, Métis and Inuit people in Canada, informed by the division of powers between governments. Like BC, Canada has legislated the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples under the Federal United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act And as part of that work, Canada has developed an action plan consisting of 181 action plan measures to implement the UN Declaration. 19 of those action plan measures reference BC or provinces and territories more generally. In addition to that, many issues central to the negotiation of treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements fall under provincial jurisdiction, most notably those including Crown land and resources. And then in relation to the last question, I also wanted to mention that we've heard concerns about decreased federal funding levels for First Nations language programs. And as I previously mentioned, BC remains committed to supporting First Nations to revitalize language and cultures as part of our ongoing work to implement the UN Declaration and create tangible improvements in the quality of life for Indigenous people. So now that the election is done, we're looking forward to engaging with Canada on the language funding piece as well as on a whole range of really important shared pieces of this work.
Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Minister. In the time I have, I'll see if I can cover two more questions. Indigenous children and youth continue to be disproportionately represented in the child welfare system. And while strides have been made to restore Indigenous people's rights to care for their own children, this must also be met with appropriate funding to remedy underlying systemic issues. And I can speak from personal experience that on behalf of clients who, when I was practicing law, who actually sadly found the federal government more responsive in this area with funding and additional funding, and it was always a challenge to get the BC government to the table to provide funding that would balance the federal funding. So I would like to, through the chair, Mr. Chair, ask the minister if the minister could speak to any funding in this budget to support Indigenous jurisdiction, culturally relevant services, and preventative measures in the child welfare system.
Recognizing the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Thank you, Chair. And this is such an important question. It is a question best directed to the Ministry of Children, Families, MCFD. But appreciate it being asked and happy to see it directed there.
Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
This would be my final question. Over the 25 years I've spent prior to becoming an MLA, practicing law, representing First Nations and local governments on a range of issues with the BC government, a range of ministries, different political parties, different governments. It has always been my experience that the public servants in the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, it's had a lot of names over the years, have always ended up playing a critical role as advocates within government. And I just want to express my appreciation for the professionalism and skill and drive and purposefulness of the public servants in your ministry who have devoted, many of them, as much time as 10, 15, 20 years to advancing the interests of First Nations and in this province, but acting as an advocate within government. And there is such a wealth of knowledge and experience in your ministry. And the question I'd like to ask through the chair is, how do you see that role playing out over the next 3 or 4 years? I can think of issues like in our cooperation agreement with the government, protection of Fairy Creek, in many other areas. Your public servants have a valuable role to play in supporting other ministries who are dealing with issues where they don't have the depth of experience in forestry or child welfare or other areas. And so while I totally understand your point about that's not my issue, ask the other minister, I would like to ask, and I'll make it short, just what your vision is for the role of your ministry in supporting other ministries as they tackle complex issues.
Recognizing the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the question and the comments, and I do just want to start out by also recognizing the incredible work of a really incredible staff team across the Ministry and the Declaration Act Secretariat, a number of whom are here in person today, but as you say, a really amazing team who hold important relationships and are so dedicated to this work, and I feel really lucky to get to do the work alongside them. My vision for this work is reflected in my mandate letter very clearly, which outlines a number of important pieces that relate to the member's question, one of which is that through the Declaration Act Secretariat, a central agency for this work, that we lead work with the Attorney General to ensure alignment of BC's laws with the rights of Indigenous people, and lead work to review and update the Declaration Act Action Plan by 2027 for the next 5-year period. My mandate letters, as well as the mandate letters of other ministries, really speak to this being an all-of-government approach, and mine specifically outlines the collaboration required to do this work in a meaningful and impactful way, including, for example, working with the Parliamentary Secretary for Anti-Racism Initiatives on anti-Indigenous racism, working in cooperation with the Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship to continue to develop and implement approaches to accelerating agreed-upon land transfers that enhance First Nations community and economic development. So while I have redirected a few questions to the specific ministries that lead them, I do want to assure the member that my team is supporting this work across all ministries, and as well as working to build that capacity. My personal vision is that we move beyond denial and denialism of basic human rights, and we move toward one of affirmation of human rights, and I look forward to working with the member and with all those in the House who are willing to get to that point.
Recognizing the House Leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and once again, thank you to all of your staff who do a great job and have been a huge support in moving reconciliation forward, and you gave great answers to great questions. Thank you.